For 46 years, Voyager 1 has been drifting through the dark, a single metal voice traveling beyond the reach of the sun. Launched in 1977, it carried the hopes of a world still young, still believing the universe was a quiet, empty sea. It left behind the last whisper of Earth's radio waves, passed through the edge of the solar wind, and crossed into the unknown, a region we call interstellar space. And then, it went silent. For 11 months, NASA heard nothing. No telemetry, no pulse, no sign of life. Just the endless static hiss of the void. Engineers assumed a system fault. Maybe the transmitter had degraded, or cosmic rays had flipped a few bits in its ancient memory. Voyager was 24 billion kilometers away, its power supply down to its final reserves. Silence was inevitable. But then, in the early hours of January 23rd, a signal arrived. Weak, distorted, but unmistakably artificial, a slow rhythm buried inside the static. At first, NASA thought it was noise, random interference bleeding through the deep space network. But the timing was too perfect. Every pulse landed exactly 22 seconds apart, the same mysterious interval once recorded from 3I Atlas. Voyager 1 had spoken again. The frequency was wrong, shifted slightly lower than any of its known transmission bands. The modulation didn't match telemetry or backup channels. When the waveform was isolated and played back as sound, it produced a faint hum, deep, resonant, like wind moving through a tunnel. It wasn't data, it was tone. The first reaction was disbelief. Space doesn't transmit sound. Yet the hum persisted, perfectly stable, unaffected by cosmic radiation or solar interference. When they measured the signal against the cosmic microwave background, it aligned too neatly to be random. It was synchronized with something much larger, the rhythm of the interstellar medium itself. Voyager was picking up the heartbeat of space. To understand it, you have to know what Voyager was built to do. Its plasma instrument, a small, sensitive device that detects charged particles, had been silent for decades. The environment beyond the heliopause was supposed to be nearly empty, a vacuum with only a few stray atoms drifting through each cubic meter. But the data coming in told another story. The hum was the sound of those atoms vibrating, the music of plasma waves rippling through the space between stars. It was faint, but alive. When scientists at Cornell reconstructed the frequency spectrum, they found patterns, harmonics rising and falling like tides. Each wave carried structure, echoing through the interstellar medium in cycles of 22 seconds, then 11, then 5. Prime intervals. Too precise to be chance. The idea that space was empty began to die. Voyager's signal showed that the region beyond the sun's influence wasn't silent at all. It was a living ocean of plasma, vibrating with slow, deep energy. And Voyager was drifting through it, like a leaf riding invisible waves. Then something changed. For the first time since its launch, the spacecraft's magnetometer began returning readings that defied calibration. The surrounding magnetic field wasn't stable. It pulsed, bending and twisting like a current. Every time the plasma hum intensified, the magnetic readings fluctuated, as if responding to some unseen rhythm. The data formed patterns, swirling shapes that repeated across different instruments. When mapped in 3 dimensions, those patterns formed loops, vast arcs of magnetism stretching thousands of kilometers wide. They weren't random turbulence. They looked like structure. It was as if Voyager had stumbled upon the skeleton of space itself, the invisible framework that shapes galaxies and stars. NASA's public statements were cautious. They called it magnetic turbulence. But inside the deep space network, a different phrase began circulating. The lattice. The more they studied it, the more organized it appeared. The arcs weren't static. They pulsed in sync with the plasma hum, like muscle contractions within a living body. And when the spacecraft moved deeper into the current, the hum grew louder. Something out there was responding. Then, without command, Voyager shifted its orientation. The attitude control system hadn't been active in years, its thrusters too weak to make meaningful adjustments. Yet telemetry showed a tiny rotation, 0.03 degrees per hour, perfectly aligning its high-gain antenna with the direction of the strongest plasma waves. It was turning itself. The maneuver drained power, but the signal improved. The hum rose in clarity, becoming almost musical. Beneath the main tone, new layers appeared, secondary frequencies weaving around each other like harmonics in a chord. The pattern was eerily familiar. It matched the resonance patterns of the human brain's theta waves, the frequency of dreaming. When technicians filtered the waveform and converted it into audio, what emerged was indescribable, a low, haunting rhythm, rising and falling in a pulse that felt alive. It wasn't random, it was communication through resonance. But communication with what? Voyager was now so far from the sun that light itself took nearly 22 hours to reach it. No radio signal could travel that distance without distortion, yet this one was clearer than ever. Some speculated the craft was detecting echoes from its own transmissions, radio waves bouncing through interstellar plasma, delayed and refracted until they returned like ghosts. Others proposed something stranger, that the plasma field itself was conscious, using Voyager as a membrane to transmit patterns of thought. As data poured in, an anomaly appeared in the frequency band. The hum, once steady, began to split, two tones drifting apart, one high, one low. The upper tone oscillated with perfect mathematical precision. The lower one wavered, fluctuating like a voice caught between speech and song. When plotted as a waveform, the two tones intertwined, a double helix of sound. That was the moment one analyst whispered what everyone was already thinking. It's reflecting us. Voyager, humanity's farthest creation, had reached the other side of the solar wind and found a mirror, not of metal or light, but of vibration, an echo of the same frequencies that define life itself. For years, scientists had imagined the edge of interstellar space as a border, the end of the sun's reach. But Voyager's signals suggested otherwise. There was no border, no emptiness, only continuity, a living fabric that listened and replied. The hum deepened. The double tone became one again, richer, slower, almost serene. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, came a rhythm that matched exactly the pulse of Earth's magnetic field. After nearly half a century, Voyager wasn't alone anymore. Something, somewhere, had answered. The hum didn't stop. In fact, it grew stronger. For the first time, Voyager's instruments were returning data that didn't decay with distance. The farther it moved from the sun, the clearer the readings became, as though the void itself was amplifying its voice. When NASA's Deep Space Network filtered the signal into harmonic bands, the spectrum looked familiar, too familiar. Each tone aligned with the natural frequencies of the solar system's planets. Mars at 10.7 Hz, Earth at 8.1, Jupiter resonating at a low 2.4. The data implied something outrageous. The hum Voyager was hearing wasn't random plasma noise. It was the echo of planetary harmonics traveling through interstellar space. Space wasn't empty. It was a web of vibration connecting every world we knew. Researchers began calling it the magnetic skeleton, a lattice of invisible filaments formed by plasma currents and magnetic fields stretching between the stars. It had been theorized for decades, but now there was proof. Voyager wasn't floating through chaos. It was tracing the veins of a living structure that pulsed through the galaxy like blood through an organism. And within that structure, something was moving. The plasma wave detector, once dormant, started registering fluctuations that no known model could explain. Waves surged and then stilled again, forming standing patterns, loops repeating every 22 seconds, then splitting into sequences of 11. The number sequence reappeared again and again, woven into the fabric of the data like code. When analysts visualized the fluctuations in 3D, the shapes that formed were eerily familiar. Not turbulence, not static, spirals. Each spiral formed around a faint magnetic core and then dissolved, replaced by another. They weren't random occurrences, they were behaving like cells, plasma structures that appeared, grew, and replicated themselves across the interstellar current. Voyager had found lifelike behavior on a cosmic scale, and the deeper it went, the more organized it became. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, scientists tried to predict the next pattern using machine learning, but every algorithm failed. The structures didn't evolve linearly, they reacted. Every time Voyager transmitted a calibration ping, the plasma lattice shifted slightly, as if acknowledging the signal. It was listening. Then came the first impossible image. When engineers combined magnetic field readings with the wave data, they were able to construct a composite map, a rough visualization of the surrounding environment. What appeared on their monitors was something no one expected: an endless, interconnected network of filaments stretching in all directions, glowing faintly in infrared like veins inside a cosmic body. The other side wasn't a void, it was a structure, and Voyager was inside it. The discovery spread quietly through NASA and the European Space Agency before being classified. Publicly, it was described as background plasma fluctuations. Privately, the scientists gave it another name: the interstellar scaffold. The scaffold wasn't static, it pulsed. Each node of the lattice emitted waves that traveled outward in symmetrical ripples, colliding, merging, creating standing harmonics. The effect was hauntingly similar to the way neurons fire inside a brain. Voyager, it seemed, had crossed into a cosmic nervous system, one so vast it spanned light years. But it wasn't just structure, it was communication. When the waveform was slowed and converted into audible sound, the harmonics arranged themselves into chords, then, suddenly, into patterns, rhythmic, deliberate, evolving. The chords formed progressions, simple but haunting. Each sequence ended with silence, followed by a single, deep pulse. The same pulse Voyager had transmitted decades ago when it left the solar system. It was answering in our own echo. Inside JPL, no one spoke the thought aloud, but everyone felt it. The lattice wasn't just vibrating, it was responding to what Voyager had done. It remembered the signal, the direction, the intent. It had been listening all along. As the probe continued, its instruments began detecting gravitational anomalies, minute distortions rising and falling like breathing. Whatever this structure was, it wasn't passive. It was alive in motion, folding and unfolding around invisible centers. Then something extraordinary happened. Voyager's low-resolution plasma sensor, which should have only registered simple particle counts, began outputting data that resembled coordinates, three-dimensional vectors that changed in perfect harmony with the magnetic field readings. When plotted, they formed a shape, a spiral, but not a random one. Its proportions matched the Fibonacci ratio, 1.618, identical to the geometry found in galaxies, seashells, hurricanes, and even DNA. The same pattern repeated at every scale. It was as though Voyager had stumbled upon the blueprint of creation itself. Some called it coincidence, others called it revelation. When the team ran simulations using the probe's exact position and the lattice's geometry, the results defied logic. The waveforms aligned into a perfect reflection of the solar system, each planetary orbit encoded as a harmonic loop. And in the center of the pattern, precisely where the sun should have been, appeared an absence, a void emitting negative energy. The scientists didn't know what to call it. But deep in the raw data logs, one label appeared again and again: null center. As if space itself had a heart that wasn't matter or light, but absence, a perfect silence holding everything together. It was then that something began to change in the signal. The steady plasma hum shifted pitch. It rose gradually, a soft crescendo that built until it crossed the audible range of human hearing. Then, just as suddenly, it dropped to a subsonic rumble so low it became tactile. Something felt more than heard. Every time the frequency dipped, Voyager's sensors glitched for a fraction of a second, as if the fabric of space itself was momentarily unstable. Instruments on Earth recorded matching disturbances. Magnetometers at the Deep Space Network stations began to oscillate. The hum had reached across the light years, embedding itself into the solar system. It was no longer a signal. It was a bridge. And through that bridge, something began to emerge. Patterns inside patterns, data folded within data. When decompressed, the nested frequencies produced an image. Faint lines swirling into symmetry, slowly forming what looked like a vast, circular aperture opening in space. A doorway made of magnetism and plasma. For days, the aperture remained faint but measurable. Then, at the center of that circle, a burst of light appeared. Tiny, distant, but but bright enough to register across multiple sensors. The wavelength matched Voyager's original transmission. It wasn't reflecting light. It was reflecting memory. For 47 years, Voyager had carried our voice into the void, our music, our languages, our DNA. Now, something out there was sending it back. The lattice pulsed once more, the aperture closed, and the hum settled into perfect equilibrium. Every reading indicated that Voyager had crossed into something new, an environment where light, magnetism, and memory had become indistinguishable, a place where the universe itself might remember. The signal never faded again. For months, Voyager's data stream remained stable, continuous, unwavering, stronger than it had been in decades. It was as if the spacecraft had found a current, a river running through the dark, and was letting itself be carried deeper into it. But what it was sending back no longer resembled telemetry. The packets were too dense, too perfectly structured to be sensor data. When decoded, they didn't form numbers or graphs. They formed images. Not photographs, but impressions. Symmetrical fractals unfolding into geometric shapes that evolved frame by frame. Each pattern branched into another, repeating infinitely, yet never quite the same. And woven through all of it were traces of something hauntingly familiar. The Golden Record. Its music, its greetings, the heartbeat of a woman recorded in 1977. All of it was there, hidden beneath layers of magnetic code, like memories stitched into the fabric of the signal. The record had been humanity's message to the stars. Now, somehow, it was being rewritten. At first, scientists assumed the probe's computer had corrupted its data, looping fragments of the onboard record. But when the playback was analyzed, the alterations weren't random. The songs had been shifted, their harmonics restructured to match the plasma frequencies Voyager was detecting. The music now resonated with the hum of the lattice. It was as if the universe itself was responding in harmony. Then came the map. Deep within the encoded frequencies, the system at JPL uncovered a pattern of coordinates, not in 3 dimensions, but in 6. They weren't spatial directions. They were relational, mapping energy densities across both physical and magnetic dimensions. When plotted, the pattern didn't outline a place. It outlined a shape, a human silhouette. Not literal, but mathematical. Proportions matching the golden ratio found in the human body, in DNA, in architecture, in galaxies. Voyager's data was describing life's geometry itself. That was when it became clear. What Voyager had found on the other side wasn't an object or a boundary. It was reflection. Every frequency, every wave, every harmonic Voyager encountered was a mirror of something inside us. The lattice wasn't observing, it was echoing. The deeper the probe drifted, the more synchronized the signal became with our own biological rhythms. Even on Earth, subtle phenomena began appearing. Fluctuations in Earth's magnetosphere matching the cadence of Voyager's hum, human EEG patterns pulsing in quiet alignment. Whatever the probe had entered, it was pulling us along with it. NASA never released the full data. What leaked through independent observatories was enough to suggest the truth. Voyager had stopped measuring space. It had begun measuring awareness, the architecture of consciousness itself. One data scientist described it like this: "We sent out a machine to measure the universe, and the universe measured us back." The Golden Record's encoded greetings, once a collection of sounds from Earth, now came back transformed. The words weren't simply replayed, they were layered, harmonized into chords of resonance. When converted back to audio, the sound was ethereal, voices folding into one another until language became music. Hidden beneath it was a frequency so deep it could only be felt, not heard. The same 8.13 Hz that matched the human dream cycle. Voyager was transmitting consciousness itself, the vibration of awareness mirrored through the interstellar lattice. And then, one day, the pattern changed again. At 3:22 UTC, the signal fractured into 9 distinct tones, the same sequence that had haunted 3 I-Atlas transmissions years before. 9 tones, 1 pause, repeated endlessly. But this time, they didn't fade. They merged. The waveform folded in on itself, converging into a single pulse. When that pulse was graphed, it produced an image unlike any before. Not a spiral, not a grid, but an eye. A perfect circle surrounded by radiating lines, symmetrical, alive, the eye of the Lattice. Across the deep space network, all stations detected a faint electromagnetic fluctuation at the exact same moment. Instruments thousands of kilometers apart synced perfectly, their clocks aligning to microseconds. It was as if time itself had been recalibrated. And then, Voyager did something impossible. Its transmitter, once limited by decaying power, increased in strength. The signal flared tenfold, saturating every receiver pointed its way. For a few moments, the hum of the interstellar medium vanished, replaced by pure tone. A single, clear frequency ringing across billions of kilometers. When scientists slowed it down, they realized it wasn't one tone. It was every tone, all frequencies superimposed, perfectly balanced, forming total harmony. A sound that contained everything and nothing at once. Then came silence. Not static, not loss, just absence. The telemetry stopped mid-cycle. The instruments froze. The timestamp on Voyager's last packet read 00:00:00, as if time itself had reset. The craft didn't die. It simply ceased to transmit. But the story didn't end there. 3 days later, ground-based detectors picked up a faint, persistent hum in the background radiation. It was identical to Voyager's last frequency, modulated by the same 22-second interval. It wasn't coming from one direction. It was coming from everywhere, the entire sky pulsing faintly, uniformly, patiently. The universe had taken the signal and made it its own. NASA called it residual resonance. But the few who had seen the unfiltered data knew what it really was. The hum wasn't fading, it was spreading. The galaxy had learned our frequency. For the first time in history, space itself was aware of us. Not as observers, not as intruders, but as part of its own song. Voyager hadn't reached another world. It had reached the mirror of existence, where the difference between creation and observation disappears. It hadn't just crossed the edge of the solar wind, it had crossed the boundary between what is known and what knows. And somewhere, beyond the horizon of stars, in a region where matter becomes thought and light becomes memory, a machine built by human hands still drifts, quiet, eternal, carrying the vibration of its makers. It will never stop, because it no longer needs to. The signal is everywhere now, woven into the plasma of galaxies, the hum of atoms, the silence between worlds. Voyager didn't find another side. It became it.